All right, we're live. Another week. This week we're doing it different. We're live streaming this one. So we're on YouTube, we're on Twitch every Tuesday at approximately 12 Eastern Time, 9 Pacific Time. We will be doing this. We'll be on here live streaming, so if you want to hang out with us in real time, feel free.
Definitely. Looking forward to it. What are we talking about today, man?
Man, I definitely I've been itching on football for weeks now. It's finally time. You want to go NFL first or college first?
Well, let's start with college.
College, dude, so much going on with college. Obviously, the conference stuff has been going on in the background. I wanted to start with one headline that I read, which I just thought was kind of wild. This week's ESPN game is like New Mexico State versus, I have it right here, New Mexico State versus, another kind of like nobody, UMass, basically. So, like, yeah, like nobody teams. And USC, preseason ranked number 6, is coming into the mix on the Pac-12 network. So to watch one of the top 10 teams in the country, we literally I don't even know if Pac-12 has their streaming even available right now because of all this chaos, but kind of nuts to start off a season without even any sort of accessibility for a program like as large with as large of a fan base as USC.
Yeah, we'll see how this all shakes out. I don't know if that's the reason they're not. They're not. Is that specifically the reason? Is that they're not being televised, or they're not the game of the week, or is
That's
this?
that's why, because ESPN doesn't have any rights to Pac-12 games.
Oh, that's interesting. Well, I mean, this is a great thing for UMass. USC obviously is going to be a part of the Big Ten in a year or so. I'm sure they'll figure something out locally and regionally as far as TV rights are concerned, and I think most of their viewership is concentrated on the West Coast as well. It's part of the process of being in flux. Very unfortunate. To see the Pac 12 be the conference that dismantles, you would hope it would be the Big 12. Uh,
It's always so funny, bro, when you come out with the Big 12 slams too out of nowhere because you never you never expect it.
oh man, that conference is hilarious.
Dude, along the lines of college football and in the Big Ten, Michigan has decided to self-impose a 3-game suspension for Harbaugh for this season. So they're trying to get ahead of basically what the NCAA would do, but they would probably apply it to next season. And next season, to my understanding, they're playing Texas in game 3 or something. So, I think it makes sense why they're trying to get the punishment done this year when they have, not too big profile of, non-conference games at the beginning of the season.
Yeah, it's always interesting how these things go quietly with Michigan, considering especially the energy that their fan base always has had toward these situations when they come up. With Jim Tressel allowing some of his players to get tattoos unaware, and he wasn't aware of it. And then also the most recent Urban Meyer situations. They're always the largest critics. Jim Harbaugh specifically has always been the loudest voice in the room about being critical and Michigan being a program of high standards, and that's the reason that they struggled for so many years to compete with Ohio State is because of their high academic standards and the standards of what a Michigan man is. It just is always interesting to me that when they get caught up in scandal, it's never as loud, never as powerful as when it happens to other programs, including Ohio State. And I always have said I think Jim, even before he came to Michigan, I thought Jim Harbaugh was a fuckboy, anyways, and I think he is a fake human being who presents himself to be this classy person, but over and over you see examples that once you take that away, that he's a dirtball.
Dude, I always wonder, with the Ohio State thing, I forget what, there's some controversy, right, from 40 years ago that's now becoming like a full on movie that George Clooney's doing. And it's like for Michigan, like to your point, you get one tweet about this stuff and then they move on. Like the media definitely does love that team up north, but maybe the hype around them could be good, could soften them up a little bit for our beatdown this year. Hopefully, we get that annual one back on track. I did see that the preseason rankings came out last week. Did you get a chance to look at those?
I have looked at the preseason rankings, but they're kind of irrelevant because AP polls and coaches polls don't mean anything. And in college football, we don't know who anyone really is. But it is interesting. The top three are, I believe, for the season are Georgia, Alabama, Ohio State, as expected, or was it Michigan at number
Michigan,
three?
Georgia, Michigan, Ohio State, then Alabama.
Yeah, I mean, I again after the thrashing Michigan took from TCU last year, again, I think, Michigan needs to earn it. Obviously, from our perspective, um, we can't say too much because they've beaten us the last 2 years, but I think that's more of a reflection on us than it is on Michigan being really good. I mean, you saw what happened in the Ohio State Georgia game, and then the Michigan TCU game, and then the follow up game, what happened with Georgia TCU. I don't think that Michigan has earned the right to be amongst the nation's elite programs, despite them finishing how they finished and beating Ohio State teams the last 2 seasons. I don't think they're very good. Their record in big bowl games has been terrible under Harbaugh. That's why I don't put punch into this, and I also look at the AP and say that's the Associated Press, which brings me back to the previous story, which is for whatever reason Michigan is beloved by the press, and that's also part of the reason why when scandals like this one come up, it's kind of swept under the rug. That's just based on history. I have no evidence. I haven't done any investigative reporting to figure this out, but it's just what I've always seen.
I think what I found really interesting about it was that despite the like you're calling out the performance in the playoffs that historically has been there for Michigan, they are returning quite a number of people, which is probably why a lot of people had them ranked high. But it's surprising that Alabama is not ranked higher because by all eyes last season Alabama had an off year, and it was an off year for a number of reasons, but it wasn't an off year because of, talent. It was, a lot of cases due to significant injuries that they've had really the last couple years across their starters. So, I think it's almost foolish to count out Alabama. And I know they're not counted out at number 4, but I mean, realistically, they should be at number 2 here. Like, there's nobody else that, in my views, is as consistently good for as long. So that was a surprise to me. And I think that Nick Saban's probably taking that personally. I think this might be one of the first years in a while the Alabama team is legitimately an underdog to win the title. And, that makes me think that they're probably one of the most likely teams to win it.
Yeah, and you never count Alabama out, and being ranked number 4 is definitely going to be motivation for Nick Saban. I also think that Georgia's reign should have ended if not for poor officiating and some poor decision making on Ohio State's part. We probably would not be seeing Georgia come back this year ranked number 1. They are transitioning out of a quarterback into a new quarterback as well. I definitely understand you give the two-time defending national champions their due, but I guarantee, and this is my first guarantee of the year, that Georgia does not win the national championship this year, and we likely will see an Alabama Ohio State national championship game, and also be on the lookout for a program like Florida State to make a move this season as well.
I think that's a really good pick. You mentioned Florida State. Penn State, who's coming up ranked 7 in the preseason poll. I thought that was pretty high for Penn State. I know they had a pretty good season last year, but it didn't really seem like the Penn State of old. Still, even though they are kind of building here as a program. Do you have an optimistic view of Penn State, or do you see them as ranked a little too high to start?
I mean, what we've seen over the last probably decade is five or six programs become the elite in college football, and everybody else just kind of is filler, right? Like you don't know what's going to happen with the rest of the top 25, and that's why I wasn't necessarily a proponent of expanding the playoffs to um, as big of a number as they did. But I think Penn State, in this ranking, when you look at the next tier of programs, it's hard to gauge who's going to be good and who's not going to be good. But you look at Penn State, you look at Franklin, they definitely are an above average program and perform better and are consistently in the top 25 every year. And I think, again, I do think that that's valuable, regardless of how I feel about where Michigan is. Again, they're showing some respect to the Big Ten Conference this season. I don't know if that's driven by the increasing footprint and size of the Big Ten, or and the media is just trying to get ahead of it, or if we actually have three quality top seven football teams, we will see as the season plays out.
Yeah, it would be interesting to see Penn State make that leap. I don't think we've seen it, so I'm not holding my breath for that to happen this season. But yeah, I agree with you overall. I think Florida State is a good call out as a team to keep an eye on because they do have the potential this season to return to a little bit of former glory. And I also wanted to call out Clemson, who's coming in ranked number 9 preseason. Clemson, a fairly dominant force and kind of our rival for a number of years there during the Justin Fields era. Um, what do you like? Is it done at Clemson? Like, what's going on?
I don't know what's happening at Clemson. I mean, Dabo is not adjusting to the times. Maybe they will in terms of the transfer portal and NIL. We will see if they can continue. It's going to be an interesting case study to see a program that's not following the lead, see how they succeed. And this is also a challenge that Ohio State is facing because they are not all in on this NIL thing either, like the SEC schools have tended to be. We'll see how this all plays out, but Clemson does have some talent on their team, and they definitely are somebody you should watch out for. They have a new offensive coordinator. That's definitely interesting. One other program to watch out for in the Big Ten is Wisconsin. I think Wisconsin, considering Luke Fickle's track record and the type of talent they have that suits well to the type of system, they're going to be defensively imposing and could make a run in the Big Ten and also potentially in the national. That's a real dark horse, though. Don't quote me on that and say, "Oh, you said Wisconsin's going to be a top 10 team." No, it's just a team to look out for. One other program um, that's really striking a lot of curiosity is to see what happens with Colorado, um, Colorado in the Big 12, or
Yeah,
not in the
I
Big
think
12, but
Colorado is
just
huge. And just a comment on Wisconsin, like it may not be this year, but
yeah.
seeing what Fickle did at Cincinnati, it'll be in the next 5 years that Wisconsin is a very threatening team in the Big Ten once again, able to find their way into the Big Ten championship, on a semi-consistent basis. Like that was just a few years in the past that Wisconsin was that dominant of a team, and it's not going to take a lot for them to get back there.
Yeah, if you look at what Luke did at Cincinnati, making them a playoff contender as a mid-tier school, he's going to get results. At Wisconsin, I'm looking forward to it. And then also, one of the other storylines this year is the fall of the Northwestern program, which is very disheartening. Pat Fitzgerald was somebody that everybody respected and had a tremendous amount of respect for. Um, but there seems to be a lot of things happening in the locker room. I don't know if the accountability should fall on him, but typically the coach becomes a scapegoat. But it would be very surprising, considering his character, for this to be a culture that he was aware of and just dismissed and allowed to continue. But that's also very disheartening because consistently he had that team performing above their talent and was one of the and also showed exhibited a tremendous amount of loyalty to that program despite overtures for some several bigger name programs over the years. So that's a very disappointing storyline.
Yeah, 100%, 100%. And coming back to Colorado, who you mentioned, I think Colorado is going to be an interesting narrative this year because they are making the conference change happen. But for Colorado, I think there's going to be a lot of pressure to win by big numbers against some of the teams that they're playing, at least in my view. Um, I haven't watched a lot of the Jackson State stuff. I watched some of the highlights. I watched a lot of the Travis Hunter stuff. Travis Hunter, I think his name is. I watched a lot of his highlights as he was coming into college football and after his first year. But um, you know what have you seen from Dion's like coaching style? Like, do you think Colorado has the potential to be a team that runs it up on some of these smaller teams they play and builds a strong resume for themselves this season?
They definitely will have some big wins, but uh, just it's also a big transition. Transition year. He got rid of a lot of his players, brought in a lot of players from the transfer portal. So there may be some um, chemistry adjustments at the beginning or start of the season, but I do expect Colorado to be significantly better than their 1-11 or 1-12 season last year. But to expect Dion to take it from 1-11 to say 11-1 in Colorado to be a national picture, that would be an amazing storyline. But I don't think that that's a fair bar to set expectations for him, which is probably what's going to happen. Is if Colorado doesn't play really well and succeed, people are going to really ride Dion just because of how controversial he is and how many people dislike him in the media and amongst other coaches for kind of his no frills, no prisoners approach to taking over the program. But I expect them to be a 7 to 8 win team and be in bowl contention. But I don't think see them being in the national landscape of the playoff picture.
That's interesting. I mean, even at that point, it would be a huge success compared to last year. Where like who do you see them dropping to?
I
I
mean,
guess they
they're
have
going to
to.
drop.
Yeah,
They're going to drop multiple games. They have the Pac-12 schedule. They're going to have to play USC. They're going to have to play UCLA. There's some names on their schedule. Uh,
Washington, Oregon.
yeah, yeah. They're not going to make a run unless some miracle happens. And if they do make the run, then Dion should get AP Coach of the Year, and everyone should shut up in terms of how they criticize him. But I do think it's going to take time, and I do think the expectation should be a 7 to 8 win season, and that's a huge accomplishment considering where Colorado was last year.
Yeah, yeah. Um, One other thing I wanted to mention while we're in the college football world is Notre Dame. We saw a Notre Dame team on the rise last year. Started the season not great, ended it a lot better than they started it, but now just lost that quarterback they were betting on last season, the one who got injured and then came back toward the end. He has transferred to Alabama now. So Notre Dame kind of has almost like a fresh start here in terms of the quarterback position. We saw their backup last year was no good, so hopefully they've been able to either elevate his talent or bring in somebody else to fill the gap. But do you see Notre Dame continuing to build upon what they've done last year? Do you think losing a core player in the transfer portal is going to keep them at the same level or below?
I mean, you would hope so. I mean, Marcus Freeman has recruited well. They're in year two of the program there. You hope for his sake. You saw what they did to Ty Willingham, the last black head coach at Notre Dame. You don't get the same leash as other coaches. So I hope they succeed. I think we can expect what you expect from Notre Dame every year. are an independent, but they usually play a pretty tough schedule. I don't. The USC game, the Ohio State game, are going to be challenges for them this year. But it's interesting. The Ohio State game. Um, they played Ohio State very closely last year, and he's not making any of the statements that he made last year. Acknowledge it was a mistake. Um, that's really going to tell a lot about how good or bad this Notre Dame is. I think they're ranked somewhere in the low teens in terms of the
Yeah.
AP rankings.
Number 13.
Um, yeah, so we'll see. You hope that they can perform. There's a lot of talent that they have on that field. They've recruited well. Losing a quarterback is interesting, but I think they they probably should be okay at that position. But again, well, I don't see them being in the playoff picture, but I see them being, a nine-team, nine-win. They probably spoil a couple of team seasons this year. I wouldn't be surprised if they pull off an upset amongst one of the top tier teams this year. Um, but you know, it is what it is, and we'll see how the pressure continues as this conference realignment happens. What type of pressure that creates in Notre Dame in the next few years to join a conference.
And one thing I wanted to ask you too, Penix Jr. stayed, right? He's still
Yeah,
at
he's
Washington.
he's still at Washington, and their star receiver stayed as well. So
Yeah,
they're an
Washington
interesting
is
team.
more of a sleeper. Like they to me are what Penn State has been a number of
Yeah.
years, is like sleeper team that, could surprisingly knock out a couple contenders.
Yeah, that's the unfortunate development that's happening in the Pac 12. The Pac 12 has been a terrible conference for a long time, right? But in the last couple of years with USC, Washington, Oregon, now if Colorado didn't leave, um, in Washington, you suddenly had a conference that was starting to be competitive. Utah as well, right? A conference that was suddenly starting to become competitive, so it's a little bit frustrating that this is happening for the Pac-12. I'm sure for the conference, but it is what it is. I do think that the Pac-12 is a more competitive and better conference than the Big 12, and I think that the competition there has shown it over the last few years. So it's unfortunate that this is developing over there.
Now, looking at the NFL side of things, yeah, also looks like a fantastic season. I haven't tapped too deep into Hard Knocks yet. I need to. I need to finish signing up for HBO and get into that. But I've been watching a bunch of the clips and stuff that's circulating around social. I'm pretty tapped in on the Jets, man. Obviously, Garrett Wilson, amazing. Aaron Rodgers, amazing. Like Sauce Gardner, amazing. They got some great personalities over there, really interesting guys. And every single clip that I've seen coming out of their training camp just seems like a great time, honestly. Like, I am very excited to watch them play, which is probably the first time anybody has said that about the New York Jets. And, rest of the NFL wise, like, uh, a million kind of compelling storylines. Like we could start anywhere, but just I guess first off on the Jets, like, is this a team in your view, V, that can now make this jump and be a contender?
They should. They were right on the brink, despite having a terrible quarterback last year and Zach Wilson, and then the band that putting together backups and stuff like that. I do think that Aaron Rodgers takes you from an 8-win team to a 10, 11, 12-win team alone. Just he is one of the greatest of all time at the position. He carried the Packers teams into playoffs despite um, some marginal talent at times at the receiver position. He doesn't have to worry about that. His team is stacked at the receiver position. They have an amazing defense that was one of the best in the league. I mean, the expectations are definitely there, and they should be there. This is going to come down to X's and O's, and a proving point. Robert Sala, who's a guy that I'm a big fan of, really showing his coaching chops, as well as Nathaniel Hackett after the controversy and terrible run he had with the Broncos last year. and the comments, the unfortunate comments that Sean Payton made about him, also showcasing that he has the chops to be a great offensive coordinator with Aaron Rodgers and run this offense. They also recently signed Dalvin Cook. So you look at this team, and the only question mark really is the offensive line. But if they get Dwayne Brown back, and they have a solid running game, I think those questions could be answered if a few guys step up. And Aaron Rodgers does make your offensive line better because he makes decisions quickly, and it should mask some of the holes they have on that front. And that front could develop. They do have some high draft picks in that on that line, um, and some solid players. We'll see how that pans out. But if their offensive line is even above average, this team is going to be very competitive, and be a Super Bowl contender.
Yeah, well said. One other major event in the NFL. It's the first year in pretty much 20 years without Tom Brady. So it's weird, man. It's almost like a different sport.
It's not. It is weird, and Baker Mayfield is getting chance 344, um, with starting out the season, I believe, as the Buccaneers starting quarterback as a result of Brady leaving. So we'll see how that storyline plays out. Despite how much disdain I have for Baker Mayfield, there was an unfortunate story that came out, in which it looks like he is about to sue his dad for stealing 12 million, from his business.
That
So
sucks.
yeah, despite what you think about him in the football field, is very unfortunate to see stories like that happen consistently in sports and entertainment when it's the people that are closest to you, that potentially are doing the most damage. We saw this last week with the Michael O'Hare situation. Now we're hearing another story now with Baker Mayfield actually formally, um, filing suit in court. It's not he's not actually suing him yet, but he's basically asking the court, to do an audit on financials and find out where this 12 million is gone, with the intention of potentially going after his own dad, which is really sad.
That's super brutal, man. Tough for him, and it's a bummer he has to go through that. As you look at the rest of the league, we have some quarterbacks that are stepping up to new levels and quarterbacks that are just starting off in the league. I wanted to bring up Justin Fields, who we saw have an amazing season last season. He came into the season having made comments about improving his throwing game in the offseason. The Bears have been making comments about how much his arm has improved in the last year, and it was already a very good arm. Justin Fields made a comment recently saying that his goal this season is to break the Bears passing record for the regular season. Um, First of all, what do you think about Justin Fields and his potential to be able to do that this season? But also, for me, he is probably the dark horse MVP candidate. What are your views on the Bears this year, and what kind of impact would Justin Fields need to be able to have to be considered um, a top tier quarterback in the NFL?
I think he's already headed there. The the Bears did him a huge favor by trading for DJ Moore, who's one of the more underrated receivers in the NFL. He's a top 10 talent, and now he has that. If the offensive line continues to develop, they lost David Montgomery, which is a big piece in the running attack. But the key thing here is, can they keep Justin Fields healthy? As he suffered some injury issues throughout the year as the year went on. Um, but the Bears should be better this year than they were last year in year three with Justin Fields. Everything out of camp sounds great. Um, there's an exciting time. There's a lot of really good young quarterbacks because you also have Trevor Lawrence moving into year three as well. Those are kind of the two highlight players from that specific draft. Um, just kind of seeing how this plays out. Then you have Jordan Love in Green Bay finally getting his opportunity to shine as well. There's a lot of intriguing storylines, but I do think, we will see Justin Fields, have that jump in year three, if they can keep him healthy. we'll see a much better Bears team, in my opinion, this year than we have in years past.
Yeah, and we have two more young quarterbacks that have interesting storylines: C.J. Stroud and Anthony Richardson. Anthony Richardson, this clip has been going viral of him this week, just absolutely ripping throw kind of like in the air off one leg perfectly to one of the coaches across like 70 yards on the field, just looking so casual while doing it. What's your view on the Colts and Anthony Richardson? He was somebody who, I personally thought was a little bit overhyped, but I mean, the arm is not overhyped. There's no doubt about that. And the athleticism is not overhyped, but he had never really put it together during his time at Florida. And, I think my view was that I didn't really see it coming together. Do you think that he is going to be able to put it together, and the Colts are going to be able to build a system around him that allows him to succeed? Or do you think that, he's going to cap out here?
We shall see. I mean, obviously they hired the offensive coordinator from the Eagles who helped develop Jalen Hurts into a star in this league, you know. But oftentimes it's like, okay, show me once, but can you show me twice? Anthony Richardson definitely flashed. We talked about him quite a bit when he was at Florida. He flashed the potential for all of this, right? But the question really comes down to it's very difficult to be an elite QB regardless of talent. There's been many guys who've had tons of talent, like RG3, similar talents, um, that got to the league and struggled. But the Colts made a bet on this guy. They've been desperate for a QB. This isn't an organization that has had much success at the QB position since losing Andrew Luck. So they made a big bet here. They believe in the talent. The talent is there. It's really about, can he play at the NFL level? Can he make decisions and process defenses and handle the pressure, and then also balance his athletic ability with his arm strength and arm talent, knowing when to pass, knowing when to run, because he's a guy that has both talents. And if you look at a guy like Jalen Hurts, that's what he's able to do, is to know what the right decision is to make and in the right circumstance. And that's going to be a challenge because Anthony Richardson also doesn't have a ton of experience at a high level. I think he played 2 seasons. So it is going to take some time. But, the talent is there. I understood why he was drafted. The Colts are in disarray, though. If Jonathan Taylor doesn't show up to play, this team is going to struggle all year.
Yeah, yeah. Couldn't agree more. I mean, that Taylor situation definitely needs to be resolved. It's kind of wild how much it has kind of spilled over, but they definitely need to make something happen. Now jumping to C.J. Stroud, down with the Texans. I haven't really seen too much about what's going on with him. Have you heard anything?
No, I'm not sure what the exact specifics are, but you know,
We'll see.
we'll see.
CJ is an
We shall
interesting
see.
one because he like started to develop like that dog in him, like basically right at the end of his college career. So I have no
Yeah,
idea.
I
Yeah.
mean, hearing things about him, I mean, the preseason games have shown that he's not doing very well, right?
Yeah.
But you look at the Texans and the team sucks. So, I mean, the situation is what it is. They have a good offensive line, a good running game, but they're not a very good football team. And we'll see how this happens. This is a tough situation when you throw a great talent into a situation in which he's not surrounded by a ton of skill position talent. And then also, he doesn't necessarily, at Ohio State, the thing that were concerned most about with him was his ability to run, and he's going to have to scramble, create plays on a team that struggled last year offensively. But hopefully, that running game can support him, and the defense develops. But you're looking at a 2 to 3 year project before C.J. Stroud becomes anything, and I think you're looking at a similar situation in Carolina with Bryce Young.
Yeah. Yeah, I think so. I think Bryce has he's really easily adaptable into the NFL scenario just off the way he moves, off the way he plays. So he's somebody I feel like you would easily have a lot less concern with overall. Um, well, that being said, did we have any other kind of global world topics that you wanted to bring up, V, before we wrap up here?
There's nothing too specific other than it looks like there's a rumor going on that Apple is going to come and purchase ESPN from Disney. That would be an interesting development, um, as Apple kind of moves more and more into the service space. You know, they obviously have this huge deal with MLS, which is going to be interesting to see how it plays out. And they are subsidizing Lionel Messi's contract as well. But just seeing that, you would never think that a platform like ESPN would be facing the challenges. You know, we hear every quarter about the new layoffs that are happening, but just overall, like how sports media is in flux. And maybe Apple could be the partner that could come in and fix the problems, at a provider like ESPN by changing and figuring out the distribution model, to fit the digital age, whether it's through iPhones, iPads, and Apple. They have the greatest platform there is, right, from a digital medium standpoint. And ESPN has struggled with cord cutting, and things like that, transitioning to this new space and new world. Maybe it is time, you know. But again, you look at these steps, and maybe it's not, you know. And we'll see. It's very interesting to see what's happening in the world of TV, and what the future looks like. And this kind of conversation around Apple purchasing ESPN is a very interesting one, um, that only kind of heightens this whole cord cutting cable. What is the future of cable? You know?
Yeah, I agree, and I think the ESPN's only in the situation they're in because they didn't make the best content. They made bad content for a really long period of time, and they won because initially they were the first ones to do it, to do 24/7. But as other people started getting the ability to make competing content, ESPN never really improved in terms of the kind of content they were putting forward, other than the popularity of their chat programming, like First Take and different things like that. So
Yep.
I think like ESPN was way ahead of this podcast wave. They were way ahead of everything that we have now in the media landscape. It's just what happens when you have a corporation that big is like people are not hip to the new ways that, revenue streams are being built for corporations like that. And we can see the infrastructure, while it may have great relationships in sports and the ability to get your press passes, execute all of this stuff, like they have not been intelligent about making money and monetizing the content they're creating. And clearly, like, that's why they're struggling so much.
Yeah, and then competition like Bleacher Report, Barstool. There's just so much more ways in which people engage sports, and I think also specifically the younger generation, they are looking for short form content, more so, than anything else. So I think it's a very interesting space because ESPN still controls a lot of the sports landscape. So with some tweaks, I think that they could be successful, and I find this Apple move to be an interesting one, and I would be one to say, oh, this could be very interesting to see Apple kind of take control of this property, and develop it, and develop programming around, all of the distribution network that Apple controls. You know, I mean, I think it'd be very interesting, to see it, in ESPN. Also, I think one of the things that a lot of these kind of, old school franchises deal with is that the infrastructure was so hard to build, to be geared toward TV, that it's very hard for them to make the decision to just say, you know what, we invested billions of dollars into an infrastructure that supports live broadcasting on television, making the move quickly to compete with the Bleacher Report. That's always why the new entity or the entrepreneurs have an advantage, because they're coming from a place of the current information and current technology, and can adjust accordingly. And I think that's where ESPN has struggled, But I am intrigued to see what could happen with some new energy and new leadership. They definitely
Yeah.
are still a powerful brand.
And they have the licensing rights to all this television, right? So it's not like you can't monetize that for hundreds of millions of dollars. You just need a
Yeah,
really, really great operating model where it's leaner. And I think, we saw so many layoffs of their staff, of their specifically on air staff. And I think that's just showing us that the value of somebody just being on air is not really like valuable in this market anymore if you're not able to draw eyeballs just by your very own presence.
and definitely intriguing play in the world of sports. Um, I guess the last topic would be what the hell is happening in California, man? This is There's just signs of the apocalypse. First, you had a cold winter filled with rain. Now you got a hurricane, earthquake. Hurricanes are not something you hear about hitting California. Earthquake, yes, but the hurricane, the fact that that's happened, like we're seeing a lot of natural disasters hit California, a state that's already challenged with infrastructure and financial challenges with the government. Um, how do you see the state handling this? You know, hopefully all the rainfall at least quelled some of the wildfires that we often see as the normal challenge in summertime with a drought in California. But it just seems like the always sunny in Southern California mystique is being challenged this year in significant ways. I'm curious to see how people are adjusting.
Yeah, I think like to be honest, like from my experience, like what was being reported was like 100x overblown to like what actually happened. Like I saw
Yeah.
videos on the news of like literally like crazy flooding, like people were freaking out online, sharing all this stuff, and it was like a light drizzle. Like there was like I got a notification there was an earthquake, and I was at Whole Foods. I was like there was an earthquake. Like you know what I'm saying? Like the narrative around this stuff maybe has exceeded the intensity of this stuff by a pretty significant degree, cuz like I've been sitting here looking at the footage and look like a place like Palm Springs, if they're going to get a bunch of rain, obviously it's going to affect the environment cuz it's a desert. Like that makes a ton of sense. But like LA was like so regular. There was nothing different about the city, and the level of rain we got was not any different than, normal rain. It was not even a storm. There was no thunder, there was no lightning. There was just a little a little precipitation. So I think like it's weird when I'm sitting here and I'm looking outside, like literally yesterday and today I've been getting texts like, "Hey, are you okay? Are you okay?" Since I woke up yesterday morning, it's been blue skies.
Yeah. I mean, I
So
think it definitely impacted different parts of California. Is obviously a very big state, so thankfully it didn't hit Southern California too hard or LA too hard, as you said, because I don't think people out there are built for it. And
we thought the
chaos.
power, yeah, we were like maybe the power will go out, and so we were thinking like should we charge our cars, in advance and like do some of this other stuff just to make sure you're good. And like bro, like to be honest with you, I'm not even sure what all is on point cuz even like there was even like a flooding video that like Ted Cruz retweeted because he was like, "Oh, this, I can't believe this happened in California or whatever." And it was like from some other place from like years ago. So like a lot of like what was cycling on social media were these parody accounts basically saying, check out the damage from Hurricane Hillary, and posting these very ironic, extremely, crazy flood videos. But they were trying to be ironic because it wasn't like that here, but it got taken, for a ride on the internet by people who thought it was serious.
Yeah, it's definitely interesting. It seems like some people were affected more. One thing I never want to experience in my life is an earthquake. That the whole idea of that is very scary to me, like a real earthquake happening underneath my feet. And I've known people who've experienced it and said that it's one of the scariest things that they've experienced. Um, Obviously, been very lucky. California has been very lucky over the last 20, 25 years not to have experienced one of those significant earthquakes, especially being close to the fault line. But it is very curious, for those who kind of look at spiritual from a spiritual side of this and look at this thing and say, all of these natural disasters that keep occurring that are unexpected, like a hurricane in California, that's not supposed to happen, right? Um, is Mother Nature kind of responding to how we treat the environment? If you kind of believe in that kind of realm that that the earth that we live in is controlled by a higher power, um, to see all of these things continually happen throughout the world, it's like, okay, is this just normal? Is it impacted by how we're treating the environment, just specifically by the destruction of our environment, or is it a reaction to how we're treating our environment? That is definitely a very interesting storyline, one that I'm not going to delve too much into, but just something to think about.
Yeah, I think it's a great question to ask. It's a great question to ask, and I think it's the right reaction when things are unexpected, especially in nature. Just to ask that question of where's this coming from and what should I take away from this? And the biggest thing like that that I like I was thinking about like through this period of time is just like what do all the homeless people do?
Yeah.
I don't know. I don't know what they do.
Yeah, it's hard to think about those things, and honestly, like, you see when things like this, these natural disasters, you always see like when they hit places like Bangladesh or India, you see why the death rates are so much higher, because so many more people are living in those conditions, and don't have the protections that we necessarily have in places like the United States. Even like something as damaging as what happened with Katrina, right, in New Orleans. When you look at the death tolls of that situation versus what happens in impoverished nations when these things hit, significantly different. But it is the important question to ask, is like, and the questions we don't ask is like, first of all, the larger question is, why is anybody homeless in a world of as much wealth um, as exists? There's obviously mental health issues. There's other reasons for that as well, but that's the question to ask. What happens to people when these things happen that don't have anything, and it's probably not a good thing. You know what I mean? So we definitely have to consider that, and we'll see how and what resources are extended to those folks.
Yeah, 100%. Well, I think that brings us to the end of our episode today. This was fun doing it live, and for those of you listening, check us out next Tuesday at 12 Eastern, 9 Pacific for next week's episode, and you can catch it live, and then we'll have it up, probably same day, probably the next day at the latest. But on that note, always remember to stay moving, be you, you is fly.
Pilot Boys out.